So if it's important for us to manage our manure properly, what are some ways that we can do this? Well, one is that we do want to make sure we are removing it from stalls and paddocks on a regular basis. And so a few ways we can do that is going to be first hauling it away. You want to make sure that your manure storage is in an accessible location. So it's easier to have a vehicle access it so it can be picked up and removed. Depending on where you live, you might be able to have people pay to use it. So if you are closer to maybe a more urban population, a lot of times people come and pick it up to use in their garden. And if not, maybe you have an arrangement with a farmer who's going to want it to use in their field. So there's a few things you can do to have it hauled away, whether you end up paying for it or someone pays for it, or maybe someone takes it for free. With that said, I do want to note that there are concerns if you are using herbicides on your pasture that your horse is grazing. We do want to be cognizant of where that manure is going to be used, because when the horse is eating a grass that has been sprayed with herbicides, the herbicides will have different half-lives and they can be pretty long. Like that residue from the herbicide can be present for a pretty long time, like years. And so if the horse is consuming it, that residue remains in their manure, and even during that composting process, you'll still have some of that herbicide residue there. I say this because if you have someone wanting to apply that manure to their vegetable garden, to their flower garden, it could die because you've just exposed this herbicide designed to kill these broadleaves, which is going to be a lot of vegetables and flowers as well. So if you are using those type of chemicals, definitely be cognizant then of who is buying your manure. If you were to go and spread that manure back out on your pasture that already had the herbicide sprayed, that's no big deal, right? But using it for other purposes, especially when you're giving it to other people, I'd be careful. Another thing to consider is dewormers can also last in the manure. So I'll try after the horses have been dewormed to pick up the poop for about 2 weeks and not have that go into my compost pile for that reason. So just pay attention to that. So speaking of applying it back to your own pasture, you can use it for that direct land application. A lot of people spread it. You can incorporate it into the soil, which is more common for fields that are tilled up annually. But it's not like I've worked for places where they just spread it because that's how they dispose of it and that's what you do. But you should really only be applying it if your land needs it. I would say this is trickiest because like right now, our property only needs nitrogen. Well, if I'm putting manure compost on my pasture, I'm also applying phosphorus and potassium that my pasture, my soil doesn't need. And so it can be tricky. You're not going to be able to micromanage or get those specifics as tight when you're kind of given this blanket product that you're using. Also, don't spread on frozen ground or near waterways because you are going to see runoff. When the ground's frozen, when it can't be incorporated, it's just going to leave, to travel. And then consider parasites. Again, I'm a huge fan of compost. Manure, not so much. Which brings me into the last one. You can compost it. And composting is this controlled microbial decomposition of the organic material done under aerobic conditions. So we're using oxygen that's going to be involved. We need to have moisture involved, but it is going to be this decomposition process which provides stability to the soil. It creates more stable nutrients that are slowly released, enriches the soil. So during the composting process, the compost also gets really, really hot. If you're turning a pile, you're going to be seeing, even in the winter, steam coming out of it. The goal is to get it hot enough that it's killing weed seeds, it's killing any parasites, it can suppress plant diseases and pests. With that said, if you're going and looking on like Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace and people are selling compost, a lot of times the average person's compost is manure that sat in a pile for a couple of years and broken down a bit. That is not true compost. Composting is a very involved process. You are turning the pile. You are making sure it has enough moisture. The internal temps are reaching high enough levels. There's a lot of things that have to be done during this process. It's tedious. It's a lot of work, but it can be very rewarding if you put that time in. But you know, you need to have the right equipment. You need to have the right setup. So I'm not going to come in here and say it's a really cheap, easy option. It's kind of like rotational grazing. It takes a lot of work, but I do feel that the benefits you have end up making it worth it. So I don't want to go too in depth here, but I did include a little spotlight on how to compost. If I can find there we go, my mouse. And so what you do is normally you're going to have multiple piles. So think of like a three-sided bin, right? And if you have 3 in a row that are lined up, and what I do is I put my waste into one, and then when that fills, I start putting my waste into the next one, and I start monitoring the one that's filled already. I'm looking at temperatures, at moisture. I'm regularly turning the pile as I continue to dump manure in the second bin. And then you know, when the second bin fills, now that's the one you monitor, and you kind of just keep that rotation going. Making sure it has enough moisture is important, so it should feel like a kind of like a wrung out sponge in terms of moisture. You don't want it dry. You don't want it sopping wet, like picking it up and it's just dripping. But we use a tarp to kind of keep the heat, keep it covered, keep that moisture in. But the process takes about 3 to 6 months. And so you do want the temps to be above 130 for 3 days in a row to kill the weed seeds, to kill the pasture seeds, to really make sure that decomposition process is happening. If you can't turn the pile, so turning it's very important. We have a skid steer we use to do this. Say you don't have that. You can use perforated PVC pipes to do this. So you kind of drill a bunch of holes in the PVC pipes, you stick it into the pile, and that's going to help with that process a bit. And what you do is you temp it regularly. Once the temperatures don't rise again, so it should get really hot when it's actively decomposing. When it doesn't do that, that means that that composting process is, the active process is complete, and now you cure it. You let it sit for 1 month to 1 year. Those nutrients stabilize before you use it, okay? No, that's a lot, but that's kind of an overview of what that process is. So, manure storage site, where are you going to place your manure storage? You want to make sure it is a dry and level area, away from water. Often we want it to be on high ground. We want to use vegetative buffers around the site. So here you see they have a cement bin, and then around here they have these taller grasses that are growing, and these grasses are going to have big root systems as well, so any nutrients leaching from this manure pile can be picked up by those grasses rather than running off into any nearby bodies of water. And then ideally we want them covered. If you can't cover it with a roof, covering it with a tarp, but thinking of any of that rain, precipitation coming down could cause those nutrients to leach. Having it covered will prevent that from happening. It also helps it retain moisture. It has many benefits. Okay, so that's what we'll consider when we're looking at our about what to do with our manure.